Wow, look at all of you. The room is full. And isn't the energy so great? Just this entire room full of powerful, courageous, bold, brave women. Here, kind of at the beginning of this, Women's History Month, but I see everywhere it's starting to change to Women's Empowerment Month. I like to call it Women's Month all year. So a lot of people ask me the question about how did I come up with this idea to start a concept prioritizing women and women's sports? And I thought I would tell that story a little bit for you today. So it started on this cold, crisp November day in 2021. It was a Sunday. And I got up and I was really excited. I love watching sports. I love watching women's sports. I love watching men's sports. I love soccer, football, baseball, all of it. But that morning, I was really excited. I distinctly remember it was sunny. I was so jazzed. I wanted to go watch the rain. So for those of you who may not know, we have both a men's pro team and a women's pro soccer team here in Seattle. At the time, they were called OL Reign. They're now Seattle Reign. But they were in the semis, and that's all that mattered. They were either going into the championship or their season was done. And we were coming off in 2021, just a little bit more than a year ago, we had watched the U.S. women's national team win the Women's World Cup. Over 1.2 billion people around the world watched the U.S. women's national team win the World Cup, right? And we had two of those stars, two of the most well-known names in women's soccer today, Megan Rapinoe and Rose Lavelle, right? Yes. Played for the Seattle Reign. I wanted to go watch this at a bar. I wanted to watch it at a soccer bar. I wanted to have a cold beer. I wanted to ask somebody else to make me a burger and deliver it to my table. And I wanted most of all to watch it with other fans. I wanted to cheer and bite my nails and jump up and down in my chair when things were going wrong or right with other people. Because when we're together, we build off of that, right? There's this energy, you get excited, you get sad, whatever that is. It's so much more exciting to watch a game with other people. This is why we go to sporting arenas. This is why we go to live games. And this is why sports bars exist. It's a lot more exciting than sitting on your couch and watching it on your laptop, right? So I wanted this. My partner was like, you might want to call around. Just make sure. Because I was used to not having a women's game on a TV. It's really hard to do. Most places still, when you go to a bar, you have to ask for a women's game to be turned on. And when you get it turned on, it's on the smallest screen in the corner, right? How many of you? All of us, right? Exactly. But I was like, well, this is the semis. It's our team. Come on. Of course they're going to be playing it. But I was smart, and I did make some calls. I started calling all the soccer bars around town, of which we have some of the best in the world, by the way. And every single one after another, said, no, we're not playing it. One even said, who? And I'm like, Seattle Reign, Megan Rapinoe as well. Yeah, no, was the answer that I got. And I felt this sense of anger that was very real and pretty calm. And I just couldn't believe in 2021, at the end of 2021, almost 2022, that we were not playing the semifinal for our National Women's Soccer League, let alone our own team in our hometown. We deserve better. Fans deserve better. Women athletes deserve better. Yeah. So then I did what any rational person would do, and I decided to open up a sports bar playing women's sports. Now, let's just take a moment. This was the end of 2021. We were just coming out of COVID. The restaurant industry had been absolutely decimated. And I thought it would be a great idea to open up a restaurant. So I tried to talk myself out of it. I put it on pause. I went around and applied for some other jobs. My last and final interview, hopefully for the rest of my life, yes, hopefully for the rest of my life, was with a tech company on the East Side. And my final interview was with a white male cis CEO. And I went in there, and after about 2 hours of talking over lunch and talking in the office, he asked one final question. He said, well, we've had a really hard time recruiting women and retaining them. And let us know, tell me, what would you do about that? Listen, this is what I did for a living. I knew what I was talking about. I showed up with data. I'd gone through their website and looked at all their not very well written job descriptions. I knew exactly what needed to be done. I laid it all out. I had data. I had examples. And his eyes glossed over. And he stopped listening. And I ended the interview. I graciously got up, thanked him, left, went downstairs, got in my car, pulled out of the garage, got on 520, and pulled over. And I called my partner and I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't continue to try to change gender equality from the inside when there is a man at the top who doesn't care enough. And I distinctly remember saying, I have no idea what the next few years is going to look like. It's going to be exhausting. It's going to be crazy. And I'm going to do it. And that was the start of Rough Tumble. Within a week, I had LLCs, I had legal counsel, branding advisors, just all the things. But the biggest thing was I knew that this wasn't going to be a sports bar, this was going to be a cultural shift. The sports industry is over $2 trillion in size, and it has suppressed women throughout all of it. When I opened Rough Tumble, women's sports media took up just 3% of all sports media. 97% of all sports that you watched on TV, all content that you got on social media, all articles that you read, absolutely everything, 97% of what was out there was men's sports. Just 3% was women's. So when I opened Rough Tumble, nobody in the world had done what I was going to do. I made this decision that day and I started Googling on my phone. I was like, women's sports bar. I was going to look at some examples and try to copy some stuff. There were none. Literally none. Nobody had ever done this. So not only was I up against what we all know to be true, limited funding, limited support. Women receive 2 to 3% of all venture funding. Only about 30% of business loans are given to women. So I knew I was up against so much, and that's taking into account every industry out there. And I was doing something so silly. I was going into the restaurant industry that had just been decimated. It was the highest risk industry that you could go into at the time. And on top of all of that, I was going to prioritize women. That was ludicrous. And it took every bit of bravery I've ever had. I was absolutely terrified. I didn't sleep. I drank a lot of caffeine. I had nightmares and night sweats. And I was terrified because I didn't know how to do this. I knew how to do a lot of it, but I didn't know how to do this because nobody had ever done it. And I just got up every morning and I drank more caffeine. And I kept going. It was a wild experience. As a woman who was often the only seat at the table filled by a woman, as a woman who was often the only woman in the room, over decades of being in the corporate world, I knew what gender discrimination looked and felt like. I knew what it felt like to be constantly convincing other people about this great idea. But now I was in it, and it was mine. And it was so much easier. So that being said, I had more bankers tell me no than yes, a lot more bankers. I had a landlord who demanded my husband come to all meetings. Newsflash, I don't have a husband. And that's pretty normal. The questions of like, how is this gonna work? People don't like women's sports. Women are not fans of sports. Why are you excluding half the population? That one got to me. I was like, no, I'm including the other half of the population. So for those of you who don't know, the sort of standard operating procedure for getting a restaurant open from concept to doors open is roughly 18 to 20 months, 24 months. I did it in 8. When I opened the doors in December of 2022, people showed up in droves. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Rough Tumble is just right around the corner. So when you're all done here, you can go over there. People showed up in droves. That first weekend, the wait times pretty much the entire 3 days, Friday to Sunday, were 5 to 8 hours just to get in the door. Yeah. And then we went into March Madness. In March, our first one, we turned away, for every single game, we turned away hundreds and hundreds of fans. And then we went into June, which was Women's World Cup. And on average, we turned away several thousand fans per game. We had lines around the block. We were the only place in the world that opened at 3 a.m. to play the final. Not just Washington State, in the world. And in Washington State, you can't serve alcohol between the hours of 2 and 6. So we got to get really creative. We had a cereal bar. We're still famous for that. It was like all you can eat Captain Crunch. It was amazing. But then, and this is the thing that I was especially proud of, in October of that, full first year. So we hadn't even been open a year yet. That October, the Reign were in the championship. And it felt like we'd come full circle. So when I opened, nobody was playing the Reign game. And in October of 2023, we clocked on nearly 60 watch parties around the state. Why? Because Rough and Tumble proved that gender equality pays. Every time we turned away fans at our Ballard location, we sent them to all the other bars. We filled every bar in Ballard and then some, and then we started filling up the brewery district. And the best part about that was everybody realized that if they played women's sports, people would show up and buy beer and buy burgers and hang out. And then other people wanted in on this. And so when that October happened, and we saw all of these watch parties that the Reign was tracking around the state, it just felt like such an incredible moment to have affected that kind of good change. We were building a fan base, we were creating space, and we were prioritizing women. Fast forward nearly 3 years to the day, and I opened Rough and Tumble number 2. Yes. We opened that in this last December in Columbia City. She is doing incredibly well. She is thriving, and to say that 3 months in is shocking. For those of you who have been to Rough and Tumble, you know she's big. She's almost probably as big as this room. We seat 255 people for a big game. And Columbia City is a lot smaller. And like a third of the size. And she's still doing 80% of the sales as the original. So we're doing okay. But above the successes of Rough Tumble, we've seen a lot of change in women's sports over the past few years. And I have the privilege of being able to clock these by seasons of sports. So we're going into our 4th March Madness. We just had our 4th Super Bowl. And each one of these, I get to see these seismic shifts in women's sports and women's sports fans and women who are sports fans, because we cater to all of those. And they're each distinctly different. Today, remember when I said that when I opened Rough Tumble, only 3% of all sports media was dedicated to women's sports? At the end of last year, it's gone up to 20. Right? Right. It's estimated this year we'll get up to 25. That is not 50%, but it is moving quickly in the right direction. We have built a fan base of women's sports fans that did not exist. Seattle is, I will say over and over and over again, the best women's sports city in the world. We are the only city that has 3 professional teams. We have the Storm, we have the Reign, and now we have the Torrent. New York likes to claim they have all 3, but that's partially in New Jersey. So I'm going to take it all for Seattle. But the bigger thing is that we started with the WNBA. We are one of the first teams ever in the NWSL. So we are now on like 2nd and 3rd generation of women's sports fans here in the city. And it shows. And one of my favorite things of all about Rough Tumble's success is that we have already watched young girls and young non-binary and girl-identifying kids come in and know that they belong in sports. And this matters because girls start dropping out of sports at a very high rate by about the age of 12 or 13. If we don't keep girls playing sports, we will lose leaders. Because as they leave, they stop gaining those opportunities to learn about leadership and courage and bravery and teamwork. And the boys who continue on in sports learn those, and they gain the skills that help them become better leaders. 94% of all C-level executive women played sports through college. 94%. It's pretty easy to see. Play sports, become a leader. If you stop playing sports, it's a lot harder to get there. So, as we navigate an era where gender equity is decreasing in the US at a rapid rate, we are going backwards. But Rough Tumble is moving forward. Bravery. I've learned it's not particularly loud. And I'm going to read this because I don't want to miss some of this. Bravery is joyous. It's steady. It's a quick gulp of air. It's shutting down self-criticism. It's moving forward anyway when you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. It's being completely terrified and doing that thing anyway. It's listening to your intuition. It's calm. And it's often powered by a good dose of coffee. Thank you so much.